Good morning. We are live this morning. I know that for those of you who will be clicking in here in just a few minutes as people slowly come on, that good morning, Kathy.
Good morning.
Are you okay?
Mhm.
All right. I do know that last week, sorry, I'm shooting around, seeing if Sassy's coming in. I always love it when Sassy's in the studio with us. So, for those of you who were with us last week or tuned in afterwards, because these live broadcasts, after they're live, they go into the queue of YouTube and they're available to watch afterwards. So I know that last week I said that I was going to start pre-recording these messages and just premiering them at 9 a.m. But for this week, I'm live again for no other reason than the fact that I just didn't get my stuff together this week. I'm still working on getting myself organized and being able to do all of this and still live a normal life, whatever normal is, right, Kathy?
Right.
But that's okay because I think this one will be fun to do live today. Now, last week I talked about what's happening with nonprofit organizations across the United States with all of this coronavirus stuff that's happening, and I want to talk about that today, and I want to share this in some detail. Maybe it's better I'm doing this live today, and then we'll just let it stay out there on YouTube because I won't have a bunch of graphs and charts and stuff distracting everything. But let me give you a couple facts very quickly that I was looking up when I was doing my research, and how much the coronavirus pandemic has hurt nonprofit organizations. One of the news articles that I read was back in June of 2020. There was an article talking about the hit that nonprofits just in the state of Arizona were taking, and they had said that as of June 2020, collectively, the nonprofits in Arizona had lost approximately $54 million in donations. I mean, you think that's a huge chunk of money for nonprofits to be trying to make up. And the reality is, most nonprofits don't have a chance to make that money up. And on the other end of that, a lot of the nonprofits, because of the increased unemployment, because of the shutdowns, because of a lot of things that we don't want to talk about with the coronavirus, the peripheral effects that I'm going to do my best not to get fired up and get on a soapbox and not get emotional. I'm not going to try and point fingers, but we see people screaming, right? Wear your mask, wear your mask. It's all about the mask. Don't let anybody get the coronavirus. And that's all we think about. And I'm not saying that's bad. I'm not saying that we shouldn't be aware of the coronavirus. There are people who have died from the coronavirus. It is a serious thing, but we should still, as human beings, understand that there's other effects of that's going on. And with the increased depression, the increased unemployment, there has been, just in the state of Washington, you think about this for a second, their needs for especially like their health and human services has increased by 11%. So when you're talking like a city like Seattle, where we're talking millions of people, 11% is a pretty big jump of people that are in need for peripheral care, and their donations, their budget has gone down approximately 29%. So they're trying to work with 27 to 29% less budget, but increase the number of people they're trying to help by an additional 11%. That's a huge flip. And my fear is that a lot of, and it's not just my fear. I mean, they say that 1 in 3 nonprofits could just go away, just have to stop, because they won't be able to recover from this. And my fear is that what happens to rural America. And I don't want to talk about politics here, but you have to look at the truth for what it is that, and I'm only sharing this really quickly, Kathy, I promise. If you look at the voting breakdown by county in each state of who voted Republican and who voted Democrat, you will see that in the large urban areas, they predominantly vote Democrat. And in the smaller rural areas, they predominantly vote Republican. And, so that's why when you have states like California or New York, where the urban centers vastly outnumber the makeup of the entire rural areas, the entire state will vote Democrat. And I'm not saying that it's good or bad. It's just, it's a fact. It's just, you can go look up the charts yourself. I know when we start talking about this, people are like, people are going to say I'm like a pro-Trump person. All I'm doing is reporting facts of here's who votes Democrat, here's who votes Republican. Historically, that's just the way it is. It's been that way for 250 years because if we go all the way back to the beginning of the nation, I find it interesting that there's a major Broadway play out on Alexander Hamilton and everything he did for the founding of the nation. I've never seen the play. I really have no desire to see the play. I've read the Federalist Papers. I have a copy of the Federalist Papers here somewhere in my stash. But back in the beginning, and this makes sense to where we are with nonprofits today. Back in the beginning, as we started as a nation, Thomas Jefferson wanted us to be a self-caring, sort of inward agrarian society, that we would just produce our own goods, we would take care of ourselves, and we would focus and maintain on the agricultural aspect of what we had in the nation at the time. The Federalists, people like Alexander Hamilton, wanted to have this huge federal sense of things with international trade and have more, basically the birth of industrialization before we knew industrialization. That has always been a bit of tension in our nation because that tension drew the difference between rural America and urban America and which one would have the greater sense of identity. And as the nation moved forward, you saw, of course, industrialization take over the nation. Now, you have to understand all this to understand the importance of caring for your nonprofits today. So I'm sorry if I'm boring you, Kathy, but now as we move forward into industrialization, we became a great manufacturing nation. We created some of the greatest goods. We had some of the best technology. I'm thinking back to the speech that Jeff Bridges gave on the show, The Newsroom. It was an HBO thing. It was like, they call it the most, if you want to look it up, it's called the most honest 3 minutes in television. He gives this speech about who we were as a nation and then where we are now. And there was a time when we were the greatest producing nation. We had the greatest minds and the technology, and we did some incredible things. But over time, we shifted as international trade continued to find an imbalance. We shifted from being a great manufacturing nation. Easiest way to say is we went from being a manufacturing nation to being a service society. And what I mean by that is in the 1950s into the 1960s, the major part of our employment and our gross product came from manufacturing. And then starting in the 70s and into the new millennium, our major form of employment went from manufacturing, from goods, to services. So we are now a services nation. It's a natural progression. The problem is if we're not aware of it as a society, there can be a downfall of our society. And we're sort of in that right now because we're seeing a major hit between goods and services. I'm pausing because Kathy gave me a look. It's not blinking, right?
No.
Okay.
I thought for a second it was.
Kathy's checking the little button that I always accidentally hit. So we are now here in the 21st century, a services nation. which means there's an expectation that we provide more services than we do goods. And with that, there has been a greater need for our tax dollars to go to areas where services are provided. And with that has been this mindset that the government will take care of our needs in these services. And the government has its fingers in many different aspects of it. Now, the problem with that, and this is where I'm going to start talking specifically about the nonprofits, is there's only government money if there's a loud enough voice in Washington to deem those services as needed. And you see that reflect in the same aspect of major corporate philanthropy, where the big corporations will give their money. We go back to the industrial time, the big money, the namesakes, they gave huge amounts of their profits to the communities they lived in. And I've preached on that. I've talked about it. That's why there's names on buildings in different towns, because the rich people at the time gave to the communities. That's just what they did. The problem with corporate giving now is very few corporations have a sense of identity in any one community. So they send tidbits of their philanthropy out to different communities, which means now there's, honestly, less money to go around because we don't have as many corporations producing goods to be philanthropists. Walmart gives, for as much as people bust on Walmart, I myself bust on Walmart gives a very significant amount of their goods or their services in the idea of philanthropy. You can go on and you can write a request for a grant as a nonprofit, and you can hope to get it. Maybe you get $1,000. But when you have Walmarts all over the nation, they only have so much money to give out to the entire nation. Interestingly, and I'm sharing this as a side note because it gives an example of the way things used to be, and it still happens today, and I love it because I'm a mountain biker, is Walmart's headquarters, where they identify as a home, is Bentonville, Arkansas. That's where Walmart started. And in the effort to rebuild Bentonville, they embraced the growing mountain bike community. And now Bentonville has become one of the most sought after places to go ride in the world in terms of mountain bike tourism. And it's because money from Walmart said, we're going to save our town. And so they were able to do it on this large scale. But what happens to a nonprofit when there's nobody from the outside looking at it and realizing what its worth really is? And this is the example I wanted to get to really start things off today. When this pandemic hit, Kathy and I, in our sense of our ministries and with our church, and then with our mountain bike ministry, we're involved in several nonprofits. And one of them is to help do a camp at Wesley Woods of Northwestern PA, which is a Christian nonprofit youth camp. When the coronavirus hit and Governor Wolf shut down Pennsylvania, the hit to that camp just in that summer camp season was in excess of $100,000, easily in excess of $100,000. I'm only using that amount, because I know that amount firsthand. But if I talk deeper to the board of directors, I know that number is bigger than that. But I don't want to speak in lofty numbers. I just want to say what I actually know is proof. And I know that $100,000 is a low ball of what that camp lost just in the camp season when it was shut down the way it was. To the extent, I want you to think about this, that although they had a small number of full-time employees, they had to let 83% of their full-time staff go. They didn't lay them off. They just let them go. There's no hope that they're going to get called back to those jobs at this point. In fact, going into the 2021 season, everything has been essentially circling the wagons and to try and survive for another year to see if things change, to see if there's hope into the future. I mean, can you imagine wherever you work, whatever job you have, I don't care if it's manufacturing, service, I don't care what it is, if your boss walked in and in one day said, I'm letting 83% of you go, what would 83% of your business be? How many people would be left there to run it? And what hope would there be to the future? And the issue with that is not just the pandemic. In my assertion of all of this, the pandemic really just shed a light on how indifferent we as a nation have become to the vital work of nonprofit organizations. Because before this, many nonprofits still struggled, especially faith-based nonprofits, because there is blatant Christian discrimination in asking for money from the major corporations, because they'll say right out, it says right on the thing, if you try, I've done it, I've tried to fill out grants and applications before, and you get partway into it, it says, oh, if you are a faith-based organization, don't bother. They say it more professional than that, but basically they say, if you're faith-based, you're not getting any money, which then leaves a huge void, because this is where rural America, and that's why I shared this difference between urban and rural understanding. Rural America has that mindset of, we take care of ourselves, we'll get by, we'll do what we have to do. But the problem is, rural nonprofit organizations are not getting money in the same sense that urban ones do. And if you want to see that as an absolute proof, volunteer fire departments exist in rural America. You get into an urban area and your taxpayer dollars has enough of a base to pay for full-time fire departments, right? We see it in the county that I live in. The major hub, the county seat, has a paid fire department. Every community outside of it is volunteers. Volunteer fire departments have been struggling for years to maintain financial aspects, not just because of the indifference to the community that the community has, and I'll follow that up in a second here, but because the urban money, where the big tax dollars come from, they don't see the importance of it. They don't see the need. And they continue to pass legislation which makes it harder and harder and harder for rural nonprofits to even exist, because they have to follow all of this legislation, which most of the time doesn't even apply to them. It's really frustrating. But going back to this indifference, for most people living in rural America, you see things that are there and you just have the expectation that they're going to exist. Well, the fire department's always been there. It'll continue to be there. That church has always been there. That church has always sat on the corner right there. That church will be there long after. We know that's not true, right, Kathy? You and I ourselves have been involved in the closing of a church. And one of the questions that was asked was, if this church closes, is anybody in the community even going to care? Will anybody actually miss it? And this comes down to the heart of understanding how faith plays into every aspect of our society, is that people who are involved in nonprofit organizations do so because there's been some personal aspect that led them there. They have some connection beyond the money or beyond the good that the organization does in the community. They have a personal connection to it. And you see the same thing with the corona. Let me use the coronavirus as, the people who shout the loudest about the social distancing and the masks are the people who have had a personal, impact by the corona. They've seen it. They know what it does, and so now they have this personal pull to it. Well, so if you have no personal connection to any nonprofit organization, I guess my hard question is, where are you connected in the community? Because we are hardwired to be a part of a community. We're hardwired to want to be in connection with other people somewhere. And as we have drawn inward and protected ourselves, and I wish I could attribute this to the right person, but I didn't write down where I got this quote from. But this is not coming from me. I just want to say that because I don't want to say I'm plagiarizing. But in terms of just the stimulus, this gentleman was talking just about the stimulus checks, right? The stimulus checks were meant to stimulate the economy. And he said, people are using the stimulus checks the same way that people use the air masks on an airplane. Because if you're on a flight and something happens and the airbags drop, right, you are instructed to put yours on first before you try to help somebody else. You have to make sure you are taken care of before you can help somebody else, right? And he said that's what people are doing with these stimulus checks, is they're taking care of themselves first, and then if anything's left, then they'll help out into the community. But statistically, we see that's not actually happening, because that money is not stimulating beyond, honestly, spending more money at Walmart. With the exception, and this is where public influence plays so much into it. I know you don't have the answer to this, but I have to ask it as a question, Kathy. Do you know what sector of nonprofit had an increase during the coronavirus pandemic?
Salvation Army.
No.
I don't know.
But see, and that's a very fair guess. That's where I would guess, right? That, okay, people know there's a herd out there. Let's give more to the Salvation Army. And I know that was a personal conversation you and I had. Mm-hmm. And you would think that's where, no. The nonprofits that had a 70% increase in donations during all of this pandemic are the Black Lives Matter and social justice organizations. A 70% increase to those urban organizations. Where does that leave rural America? And this is my closing. This is how you can fix your neighborhood. This is how you can fix the nonprofit that you have a concern about. This is how you can try to connect with the community around you. Is number one, and I would say that we are doing this as an example. If you want to follow up more with us at tidioutcreek.org and look at how we're running our faith-based organizations, how we're tying together with other nonprofits. Really, the idea of partnering with other nonprofits is vital right now, because a lot of times the expenses that you have, you could actually be sharing in certain ways. We do it with the two biggest expenses are the building and the employees. Always, those will always be your two biggest expenses. And we found a way to minimize those with the way we're doing the organization. And it's been incredibly helpful and has given us a broader understanding of nonprofits around us. Now, the other thing is, you have to remember, this is why I'm pushing so hard to have a focus on rural America. One, because it's in my heart. That's where I serve. I serve rural Appalachia, and they are the forgotten part of America, and it bugs me to no end. And the hardest part of that, and I heard this back, early in my preaching, I've heard this back when I was coaching in high school, is you have all of these different little nonprofit organizations that all feel that they have a vital role in the community, and there's a need there for what they're doing, and they're not getting money from outside the community, so therefore they try to get the money from the community. Well, if you have a community that only has a couple thousand people and you have 20 nonprofits, those 20 nonprofits are going to continually ask for funds from the same 22,000 people. Right. They, in terms, people say you keep, everybody's trying to go to the same well over and over and over again. And there's only so many funds that are there. And sometimes, and this is hard, but sometimes I feel like nonprofits need to look at where they're at and is how they're doing things necessary. And in some aspects is what they're doing really the best thing for the community. I will use that in the terms of our educational society. I will say that we live in a community where we have 4 public high schools, we have a Christian school, and we have a charter school. And our population is low enough that all of those students could fit on one campus. There's no need for us to have this many schools in the area where we're at. Financial, in terms of finances and for what's best for the kids, we just don't need it. But we look at things in our community and we hold on to this nostalgic feeling of this is the way it needs because this is the way it always was, right? And nostalgia can be a very deceptive mistress. And we need to right now, coming out of this pandemic, step back and look at the big picture and go, what is really important for us as we move forward, as we fix this? Because, and this is probably going to be an episode coming up, is the most insulting word to me as a veteran in the United States right now is the term sacrifice, because everybody likes to talk about it, but nobody likes to do it. And we need to come to the idea that maybe we need to sacrifice in certain areas and give up our own nostalgia and do what's best for the community. Because the absolute reality is if you're not going to connect personally with a nonprofit, if you're not going to find some need out in the community and embrace it, then you're just going to keep making sure that airbag is on for yourself, and you're going to have less and less care about what happens in the world around you. And that honestly is sad. But the other aspect of it is sometimes when we're trying to hold on to things that we don't really have to have, we're hurting the next generation. And so I feel like as rural America continues to change, the one thing we have to do at times is get out of our own way and realize that we're not going to get the help from urban America. The big corporations aren't going to come here anytime soon and bail us out. We're on our own. We have always been on our own. We always continue to be on our own. That's just the way it is. And if you want a perfect example of that, and I don't say that hurtfully, I don't say that to be mean. That's just truth. That's just the way it is. And if you want the perfect example of that, is right now, if you go into a populated area of the United States, they are touting 5G internet or 5G phone service, whatever, right? Do you know what I'm talking about, Kathy? The higher gig.
I understand.
You know what I mean? Like here's the newest and the best and the greatest that we can give you in the digital age. Mm-hmm. You get into an area, the town just down from us, 2,000 people, right? And you can barely get cell service in the town. And we laugh. You get up into the forest in rural, you get truly into rural Appalachia, you have no cell service. The best you can do is if you need to call 911, 911 will bounce off one of the towers. Somebody will answer a 911. They have, this sort of bugs me. They have that technology set up, but they can't increase phone service. Why? There's no money in it. There's no money in rural America. And that's the long and the short of it. And that plays down to what happens to the nonprofits. Because I promise you, whatever nonprofit you're thinking about right now, all the way up from the American Cancer Society, the American Heart Association, all of them have taken a huge hit. And their hit has changed how they're doing research right now. So I want you to think about, maybe I should finish with that. I want you to think about that. We have been so focused on being fearful about the coronavirus that has a 99% survival rate that we have taken money out of the pockets of scientists who have been diligently working to cure cancer. So our lack of giving, or our lack of community, remembering to care about the community as a whole, is potentially killing other people. You think about that for a minute. So I'll close with this today. I see it's 9:30. I would pray for each of you to, as you're during this shutdown and pandemic, every time you put your mask on to go somewhere, I want you to think what nonprofit organization is struggling, that's being suffocated by all of this. And you'd be amazed, because a lot of times I don't think people realize how many nonprofits are out there doing things. Like I said, all the way from the American Heart Association down to the local animal shelter. They're all hurting. And the only people who have an opportunity to save them and pull them out of this is us. So that's my message for today. Maybe it was a little heavy, but it was something I felt like it needed to be said. So if you want to follow up more on what we do as a nonprofit, then please subscribe to this page, like what's going on, and check us out at tidioutcreek.org. All right, everybody. Have a great day. Amen.